Good evening and welcome to another appointment in this cycle of international video conferences dedicated to tramways and other means of transport. Tonight's presentation comes from the Netherlands, and Ralph Münzenmeyer will talk about the history of tramways in Amsterdam, the Dutch capital. This presentation will be done in English with some text in Italian, but at the end of the evening there will be a space for any questions in English or in Italian, also in French and German, as Ralph has said. And you can also use the chat in every moment during the presentation. I remind you that the complete program of the forthcoming presentation is available on our internet site English section. Before giving the floor to Ralph, I remind you also that our next presentation on Tuesday, the 7th of November, will be titled The Trolley Buses of Newcastle upon Tyne from England. Thank you. Now I repeat everything in Italian. Buonasera, benvenuti a tutti a questo altro appuntamento nel ciclo di videoconferenze internazionali dedicate ai tram e agli altri mezzi di trasporto. La presentazione di questa sera arriva dai Paesi Bassi. Ralph Münzenmeyer ci parlerà della storia dei tram nella capitale olandese Amsterdam. Questa presentazione sarà fatta in inglese con qualche testo italiano. Alla fine della serata ci sarà spazio per domande eventuali in inglese, italiano, ma anche in francese o in tedesco, come Ralph ha detto. E anche usare la chat in ogni momento durante la presentazione. Il programma completo delle prossime videoconferenze è disponibile sul nostro sito internet. E prima di dare la parola a Ralph, vi ricordo anche che la prossima presentazione, il 7 di novembre, martedì, si intitolerà I filobus di un Newcastle upon Tyne dall'Inghilterra. Grazie, e ora la parola va a Ralph. Ralph, please, you can start.
Thank you, e grazie, and buonasera. Okay, we're going to talk about Amsterdam trams, but that will be in a few minutes because, oh, I have to push, let me see. Because I start with a little bit of history of our country, and that is just to give some reference to certain facts that will come up later. And after that, we'll talk about the Amsterdam trams network, the models that have been used in the city here, some of the company buildings, some politics, and some idiosyncrasies that are there. I will also talk about some other tram and railway facts of the Netherlands, and I will talk about the Elektrische Museum Tram di Amsterdam. That's the tram museum in Amsterdam. The history is a bit of a weird one. The Netherlands was always a republic, and now it's a kingdom. Usually it's the other way around, but we went backwards, if you could say it like that. And when we were a republic, the city of The Hague was the seat of our government, and it was our capital. All of that changed because in 1806, we were occupied by the French, and Napoleon, he sent his brother to Holland, Louis, and he said, now you are the king of the Netherlands. And Louis, he didn't like The Hague. It was too close to the sea, and so he looked around, where shall I live? And he went to Amsterdam, and he moved there. And that is why, since 1808, Amsterdam is the capital. In 1813, when Napoleon had already gone and we were freed again, our government also went back to The Hague because that's where they had always been. But we remained a kingdom that didn't change anymore. And the king settled in The Hague. He also lives there now. And that is why we have this strange situation that The Hague is the seat of our government, but Amsterdam is our capital and has always been since then. And why am I telling you this? That is because The Hague had the first trams in the Netherlands and not Amsterdam. And now you understand why that was. Here you see 11 cities in the Netherlands, 7 of which have a blue bullet points, and they are the cities in which we have trams today. And the blue circles, they are cities that used to have trams in the Netherlands, but not anymore. Holland is not such a big country. It's 300 kilometers tall and 175 wide. So all in all, if from Amsterdam you travel 1 hour, you get into Germany. If you travel 1 hour, you get into Belgium. It's really small. And it also means that you can go from anywhere to anywhere and back home on the same day. So basically you don't need a hotel. If you have to travel for business or something, you can always get home. Amsterdam is not a big city. It only has 900,000 people living there. The metro area of Amsterdam is a bit bigger, 1.5 million, and the whole country has 17.8 million people. That's not big. So these are the 4 current tram cities. And as I said, The Hague was the first city in the Netherlands with trams. In 1864, they started with horse trams, and it took another 11 years, 1875, when Amsterdam also joined. And after that, Rotterdam and Utrecht joined. But Amsterdam was the first to have electric trams. In 1901, they started electrifying the network, and The Hague followed only 3 years later. In Utrecht, it's a bit weird. In 1879, they started with their trams, and in 1906 with the electric ones, but that ended in 1939. And then back in 2019, they started again. So they saw the light, they thought, oh, we do need trams after all. So they started that again. Then the other cities that used to have trams, you can see here that most of them stopped using the trams already before the Second World War or shortly after that. The only city that was a bit late, that was Leiden. They had trams until 1960 and they stopped it as well. And that's how we are left with the 4 that we know. What you see here is the difference between the gauges of the tram. Most of the cities have normal standard width, but there's a few that have narrow width, used to have narrow width. Arnhem and Enschede, they are in the east of the city. And Haarlem, they had both. They had narrow width and standard width. So that is also a bit strange, but that's how it was. And also in Amsterdam, you'll see later on, there was something with a narrow gauge as well. Then apart from the city tram systems, there were also regional tram systems. And I put the areas where you could find them. This is where the electric trams used to run. And you see that in the west, between Amsterdam and Rotterdam, there's sort of a C-shaped area. And that is also the busiest area of the country. That's where most people live. And so you see there's all kinds of connections in the old days with regional trams. And this area nowadays is called the Randstad. And you could compare it in Italy, probably to the north of Italy with Milan and Turin, etc. But that's not all, because we also had a lot of steam tram, regional tram lines. And when you look at this, you would even think, why would they probably not need any railways, because there's so many tram connections. Why would they have railways? But we did. We always had railways as well. And we still have, of course, all those regional trams are gone, but the railways are still there. So we're very, very easy to travel in as a country. So back to the cities with the trams. And you can see that there's a few local regional light rails nowadays. There's 2 lines in Amsterdam, there's 1 in Utrecht, and there's a few between Rotterdam and The Hague. And there were also some plans for more light rails throughout the country, but these have never been realized. There's been political opposition or not enough money or whatever, but they were never realized, and probably they will never be. Then to Amsterdam. This is a map of Amsterdam, and you can see it's about 11 kilometers by 19. As I said, 900,000 people live there, so it's not really big. And that means that, as you all know, Dutch people use bicycles. This is a very easy city to come around with a bicycle. The big yellow parts, that's all what is Amsterdam. And you see that in the southeast, there's a separate circle. That's a newer part of the city, and that's why it's not connected, but it is Amsterdam proper. And then the blue part, that is the city center. And this is the tram network as we have it today. And you can see actually to most parts of the city, there's a tram line connection, except for that separate thing that is in the southeast that is not connected by tram. And the one that goes all the way south actually goes out of the city and to the city that is there. It's called Amstelveen. They are also connected by the tram. Apart from trams in Amsterdam, we also have metros, and this is the tram and metro network together. And then you see that the separate area in the southeast is connected by these two metro lines. So they also have a rail connection. And this is only the metro lines, and most of the metro actually runs above ground. Only the red part is underground. And as you can see, that is mainly in the city center and in the older areas around it. And you can see that the metro line goes to the north of the city, because north of the city center is a river, and to cross the river was always impossible other than through a tunnel or by ferry. But now we have this north-south metro line, and now the people are also connected by rails. So this is the city center. It gets smaller and smaller, 2.5 kilometers from north to south and 3.9 from east to west. I happen to live about at the end of the vertical arrow on the bottom side, and the top of the vertical arrow is where the central station is, and I can walk there in like 28 minutes. So it's a very walkable city center. And on my bicycle, I would get there within 10 minutes, in 8 minutes, maybe even. The tram network has a couple of nice things. For example, grand unions. We nowadays have 3 grand unions left, but we used to have 6 of them. Unfortunately, when they take away one bow or whatever, then it's not a grand union anymore. So there's 3 left. And there's 2 that are not on the map because they're a bit out of the central areas where we have the same functionality of a grand union, but it's like a roundabout. It's not a crossing of 2 lines with connections in each direction. Then we have a couple of gauntlet tracks or single double tracks in the city because the streets are narrow in certain places, and it's impossible to have a double track there. So where you see those yellow areas, there's a single track, but they have 2 technical solutions used. The blue circled areas, they are the gauntlet ones, and the red ones, they are actually single tracks that are used in 2 directions, and they have a switch. So on the left one, the blue circled one, that is a gauntlet one, and that's the upper photo. And you see that the 2 tracks don't actually become one. They are parallel to each other, whereas the one in the red circle, that is a single track with a switch. And on each bridge, these 2, because both of these streets, they are crossing through 3 canals, so they have a lot of bridges to cross, and there it goes double track because that's where the trams can pass each other. So it's quite interesting to make a trip through these streets because there's always a chance that trams from both ends actually enter the streets, and then one has to back up. And of course they shouldn't. There's all kinds of rules how that works. But sometimes the tram driver simply forgets, or he thinks, oh, he will wait for me or whatever. And then they are head by head, and one has to back up. And unfortunately, it's not allowed to do so with any guidance. So they have to call the people from the tram company, and they will come with a car, and then they will help them. So the tram will be delayed and everything is stuck. We always have to laugh about that when it happens. This is a photo of one of these two streets, and you see that the trams are here passing each other on the bridge, and the one going to the end of the photo has to wait until that tram number 11 is completely off the track. So it's always been a puzzle, actually, does it fit or does it not? It also means that in certain times, the trams had grown longer and two trams would not fit on the bridge. So only one could be there, and the streets was off limits for the trams that were too long. This is a picture from 1911, but this has not changed at all. If I go there today and take a photo, you will see exactly the same thing. Another nice thing that we have is a so-called roller coaster track. And it's the little red track that you see there. Actually, this track was not in the black networks, because the black ones are only the tram lines, but there is some rails here and there that are not used by tram lines at the moment. And this red one is one of them. And what is interesting about it is that this track has 3 bends and it has 3 bridges. So when a tram goes through there at a certain speed, it's almost like you're in a roller coaster. We use this street a lot, but with the old cars, you cannot go very fast, and we don't do that. But the slightly younger trams, like the ones from the 1960s, they can go quickly through there, and you really have to hold on tight, because it is like as if you're in a roller coaster. So I have a little film here, and actually this is a tram of ours that is being towed away because something else happened. But actually you can see how it goes over the bridge and then turns in a corner, and then further down there's another corner the other way and another bridge. So you see exactly what's happening if you were to go fast here. Why are we towing this tram? Because this summer there was a storm and the overhead lines had been broken here and there. And when they fixed them, they all need to be checked if they are all right. And they forgot to check this one with us. For the normal trams, it would have been all right, but because here there are no normal trams running, it should be checked by us, and we hadn't. And then it turned out it wasn't in the right position, and it broke our bow collector. But you see, the tram makes the corners and it makes the bridges in a very nice way. And there it goes. Another nice thing, I already said there's a place where they used to have narrow gauge, but also in Amsterdam we had a small part of narrow gauge, because this regional tram company NZH, which goes to Haarlem and to Zandvoort in those days, it used narrow gauge. And so in the city center where it started up until the end of the city, there was a third rail in between the rails of the normal trams, and that's where they ran. Actually, Zandvoort is where nowadays is the Formula 1 circuit of the Netherlands. So if you ever see that again on TV, then you know, oh, that's where the narrow gauge tram took the Amsterdam people to the beach, because that's also a beach city. In the little circle that I'm showing you here, there's a bridge, and on that bridge, there is this extra third rail, just 5 meters of it, to show the people that's how it was in the old days, 1000 millimeters, and then 1.435 for the normal gauge. Then we're going to talk a bit about the history of the Amsterdam Tram Company. As I said, in 1875, it started with horse trams. That was actually a different company. It was a private company, Amsterdamse Omnibusmaatschappij. And in 1897, it's a bit weird line here in the presentation about trams, but in 1897, the municipal ferry company was started. I told you we have this water on the north side of the the city center, and to get across you need a ferry if you're on your bicycle or a pedestrian. And so they started the company for that. Then in 1900, the city started a tram company, Gemeente Tram Amsterdam, GTA. And they took over the company AOM. So then the private company became a public company owned by the city. Then in 1901, the city council had a lot of meetings about what are we going to do with those trams. Of course, it was a new technology, etc., etc. And they said, we're going to build 13 tram lines. That's what we want, and that's what we need. So that was the plan, and they started electrifying those tram lines between 1901 and 1906. And at the same time, they changed the gauge of the tram rails because it was slightly narrower than the standard gauge. So that's when they had to change that, the gauges, the rails as they took it from AOM. The trams in those days, they still had a trolley, as you also had them in Italy, for example. But here in Amsterdam, the trolleys were a problem because all the bridges and all the crossings that there are places where the trolley can leave the wire easily. And because here we have a lot of bridges, and because the city is so compact, there's a lot of streets that you cross, all those spots where you lose the trolley, it's the delay for the tram. So they had to think of something else, and all the trams got a bow collector instead of a trolley. And after that, never again a trolley here in Amsterdam. A funny thing is that in 1908, the city council said, actually, you also need to figure out if you shouldn't use buses instead of trams, because then you don't need all the infrastructure. So get some buses and see how that works. And that's what the GTA did. They made buses because there were no buses available. And I took this picture especially because it says Fiat. They got a Fiat truck, and they put the cabin of a tram on top of it, and there was a bus because there were no buses available yet, not from the car manufacturers. They only made motor cars, passenger cars, and they made trucks, but no buses yet. So this was made by the tram company. It doesn't look very comfortable, and it wasn't. 2 years later, they had this. This was also a Fiat bus, but still it wasn't a success. It looks better, but somehow the people didn't like it. And so the whole project was blown off and no buses. Then 14 years later, 1922, they did introduce bus services. And then it worked because actually by that time, the car companies also produced buses, and they were more comfortable. They were made for that purpose and not as a truck that would be used for passengers. So from that moment on, the tram company also had bus lines. In 1930, the number of tram lines had grown from 13, as they had planned it in 1901, to 25. And that's the largest number of tram lines we've ever had in Amsterdam. And then we get into the war. And in the war, 1943, the Germans that had occupied their country, they said, tram company, you need to merge with the ferry company. And that's why I mentioned ferry company was started in 1897, because in 1943, the tram company that ran buses also had to run the ferries. So it became one big municipal transportation company. And the last thing that is on here, in the end of the war, in October 1944, the tram services had to stop. There was no more energy, and spare parts had run out, etc., etc. So they couldn't run the trams anymore. But thank God it was only one winter, because in May 45 we were liberated, and 1 month later they already had some trams running. Then something that happened in the late 1940s is that they had to lower the overhead wiring, because they had put them up on a higher level than was normal. They thought it was ugly when they put them up, and they said, let's put them higher up so that people can still see our beautiful city. But after the war, they figured out that it would be easier to have standard height. So they lowered them to 5.5 meters. And in the 1950s, they started talking about replacing tram lines by buses, because now the buses had become popular and it doesn't need much infrastructure, and all the trams that they had were all pre-war and were old and needed more than just maintenance. They needed repairs and stuff. And I thought maybe it's cheaper just to go to buses. So there were plans to make all the tram lines bus lines. But it was just a few years later that they figured out, oh, we're building new areas of the city and they're further out, and we can never transport enough people with all the buses that we would need for them. We have to use the trams. And so then they figured out we have to buy new trams that are better, bigger, etc. And the whole plan to stop trams and use buses, as had happened in all the other cities in the Netherlands, it didn't work out for Amsterdam like that. Then in 1971, it says Leidsestraat is open for double articulated trams, because the articulated trams were longer. And as you saw on the photo with the bridge where the trams have to pass each other on that street with the single track, they had forbidden the double articulated trams to go into Leidsestraat, but they had then extended the bridge a bit, and so they could pass each other on that bridge in 1971. 1977, we got our first metro line to go to that area in the southeast. And it took until 2018 until they dared to build a second underground metro line. And why is that? When they built that first one in the 1970s, they opened up so much of the ground in the city center, and they broke down so many old buildings. There were so many protests, and it cost so much more money than they had planned. So it was really a disaster, that project. So they thought, we're never going to build another metro line again, except for some above ground lines. But in 2018, they had built a second one, which had taken them, I think, 15 or 16 years altogether. It was also a disastrous project, but it's there and we're using it. So now it's time for the trams. I'm going to show you all the trams that have been used in Amsterdam over the past 120 years, except for those that were built in series of 5 or less. First, I'm going to show you this picture of our Dam Square with the horse trams. That is how it used to look up until the moment they started electrifying it. And the funny thing about this picture simply is that today it still looks the same. Nothing has changed almost. It's amazing. In Holland, we have 3 tram factories, or we used to have 3 tram factories in alphabetical order. Alle, which is from Rotterdam, they built trams and trains. Then there's Bijnes, which was from Haarlem. Later they moved to the city of Beverwijk, which is north, close to Haarlem on the north. They actually started with building carriages and then also trams, trains and buses. And last but not least, there's Werkspoor, which started out in Amsterdam, but later moved to Utrecht. And they've always been building engines at first, steam engines, and later combustion engines for ships. And then they also started building trams and trains. All of these companies do not exist anymore, but in the last century, they built a lot of material for train and tram companies in the Netherlands. So the first electric tram, it was built in 1900 and used until 1937. 10 units were made, and it was built by Werkspoor. And this one still has trolleys, but the trolleys were replaced within 1 or 2 years. And when they started using the electric trams, of course, they still had a lot of horse trams, and the horse trams became trailer cars for the electric trams. So they still made use of them, but they did not electrify them, just as a trailer car they were used. That was a small series, but after that, they ordered huge quantities of Union trams. These were built by an Hungarian design, and it was built by Wexpor. It was built by the Hungarian manufacturer and also by a German manufacturer. Altogether, 205 units, and they were delivered directly with bow collectors, so no more trolleys. Funnily, these trams were designed as if they were horse trams, so they had an open balcony, because to run the horse you need to be able to reach, but it wasn't necessary anymore with an electric tram, but they hadn't thought of that. So this tram still did not have a windshield and no doors, nothing. The driver was out in the cold. It took them for about 5 years that they realized they didn't need it anymore. So then they started putting in windshields, and only 15 years after that, they started putting in doors, so the driver would actually be warm and dry. All the color pictures are made from our trams, from our collection. So these are the current trams as we still have them. I see the question of Ludwig Schönefeld. He's asking if the Union tram truck looks like the trucks produced by Weyer and Co. in Düsseldorf. I don't know if there's a relationship. I'm afraid I can't answer that one. Sorry. So after the Union tram came with the tram that has a nickname, and in Dutch it's called the stoeltjestram. So in English that would translate a seats tram. And why was that? This tram model had seats that you could flip forward and backward depending on the direction in which it was used. So you would always sit facing forward. And the people started calling it the stoeltjestram because all the other trams had benches, and these were all separate seats. Only 20 units were made, and first they were used as the trailer car, how they were in which way they were built, but later they were electrified, and then they became engine cars. And this one was also built by Wexpor, and it had Schuckert electrics. Then there was this open trailer car, which was also popular in these days. They built 18 units. In Rotterdam they were built. And of course, they were mainly used in summer. This one is in our collection, but it's a replica. It's not an original one, but it was built on an original truck. And we use it only outside of the city center because it's too dangerous with all the traffic and people might stick out their hands and whatever. Then this tram model, this is a trailer car as well, but 80 units were built in a couple of batches in between 1914 and 1921, and they were built both by Wexpor and by Hawa, which is in Hanover in Germany. And it was called, it has a number of nicknames. It was called the 5-window tram, or the large balcony tram, or the globe roof tram, and that is because the roof is a bit spheric. Dutch people always give trams a nickname. From the same time, 1913, a batch of 65 units of this 3-window or large balcony tram was built. And a few years later, another series of 70 units. They call it the large balcony tram because the balcony is long enough so it can fit a double door. And the double door means you can use one door for entering and the other door for exiting. And that was something new in those days because before that the trams had one door and the people took longer to get in and out. And of course that wasn't very efficient at the tram stops. Then this is a bit of a lone wolf, if you will. It's called the Utrechter tram. So it comes from Utrecht and it was used in Utrecht up until the moment they closed the network down in 1939, and then Amsterdam bought them. But it's a tram of 1927. So it fits here in our lineup chronically, but we only started using it in 1939, just before the Second World War. And it was built by Werkspoor as well. And in Utrecht, I believe it was yellow, but in Amsterdam, the trams were blue, so they were painted blue, of course. Then a very important tram model is this 1929 model, and it was called the New Blue one. And strangely enough, they already had experience of the double doors for the quicker entry and exit, but this one was built with a single door again. And when Amsterdam was ordering these trams, they needed a big amount, but they didn't want to spend a lot of money. They were quite frugal in Amsterdam, always have been. At the same moment in Rotterdam, they were also buying new trams. And Rotterdam was very generous, and they were buying the best they could get in the late 1920s. So in Rotterdam, they got a tram with 2 bogies, both with 2 axles, and very powerful engines and nice soft seats. And Amsterdam was buying an old-fashioned truck with 2 fixed axles and not so powerful engines and wooden seats still. And if you compare those 2 trams, they're really light years away from each other. And another tram from that same period is the Van Totto, as they have it in Milan, was also a very modern tram compared to this one. So it's strange that Amsterdam didn't want to spend that much, plus making the mistake of having them built with single doors, but they did. And nowadays the trams are still there. Lots of them are still there. They're very popular with the audience. Peter, I will answer your question in a few seconds. But what happened with this tram, when they had bought them and used, only after a few years, they figured out we do need the double doors. So what they did, they extended these trams by 60 centimeters, 30 on the front and 30 on the back. And then there was enough room for double doors. So Peter, no, it didn't take away any seating space because they just extended the trams. The one that you see in this picture is the original model. So we turned back the extension and made it look as original as possible again. But all the other ones of this series that we have, and we have quite a number, they all are the extended version. Then another 30 units that they had ordered actually first became trailer cars, but already they were prepared for conversion into an engine car, and that happened also within a couple of years. So by then they had 80 of these trams. So in this picture, the one on the left is the older version, the non-extended one, and the one on the right is the extended one. And you can see that the nose gets narrower because they extended it. And so it's quite a pointy nose. And also the one on the left has a newer livery, because at first they had a darker blue, and then in mid-1930s, when they made the newer version, they used a lighter blue. Another thing that we had were these so-called bird cage trailer cars. There was a shorter version that was built in 1922, and there was a longer version. The one in the photo is the longer version. It is built in 1930. Both versions were built in 20 units by Linke Hofmann and by Allan. And these cars had a low entry because the door was in the middle of the axles. They could lower it so you could get in more easily. And then in the once you were inside, you had to still get up another step to get to the compartment. Now, why are they called bird cage cars? It's because the conductor that was in the tram going to the front and to the rear cabin always went down a step and then up a step and down a step and up a step, like a little bird in a cage. So that was a nickname. They were also called nougat blocks because they also looked a bit like that. Dutch people have a lot of nicknames, as I said, for trams. It's the only tram in Amsterdam that we had with a center balcony instead of balcony in the front and in the rear. Then there were these Boldakker trailer cars of 1914. A number of those were also electrified in the 1930s. So already the tram was from 1914, already 20 years old, but they made electric ones out of them. And also these had this globe roof, that's Boldakker in Dutch. And then we've had the Second World War, and after the Second World War, we needed more trams. Not all the trams had survived. A number of the trams had been taken to Germany and did not return, simply because the Allied forces had bombed cities there, including trams. So some of the Dutch trams were bombed in Germany. And the first tram that they bought in 1948, 1949 was a 3-axle tram. Again, Amsterdam was being cheap. They needed bigger trams, so it needs to be longer. You cannot extend a truck with fixed axis more than that because it won't fit the radius of the bends. So what do? We do a 3-axle tram. And this Büchli system, this Swiss engineer, Mr. Büchli, invented it, that the 2 axles can swivel and they are connected by a 3rd axle in the middle. So if the front wheel axle makes a turn, it pushes out the middle one and that pushes in the rear axle. And that way the 2 axles can be further apart. And so you have a longer tram, more seats, etc. A clever way, cheaper than 2 bogies, but the problem with these trams was that they had weak engines. So if you have a lot of people in there and you have a trailer car and you have to go up the bridges, it gets quite slow. So they weren't very popular with the drivers. The good thing about them was it was the first tram in Amsterdam that had soft seats, no more wooden benches. So that's a good thing. When we use them today, actually, I think it's a very nice tram because the interior is very cozy. It's not the old-fashioned pre-war thing with all the wood, but it's cozy. It's a nice setting. If you're there with a group or family or something, it's a nice tram ride, always. And then a few years later, end of the 1950s, then Amsterdam finally figured out, as I told you before, after they had the thought of making buses of all the tram, bus lines of all the tram lines, they figured out we need good trams, big ones, modern ones. And they went for the articulated tram. And the articulated tram was built in 7 batches, and we also call them 7 generations. That's why they're called 1G through 7G. And they were all built in Holland by Bijnes and a few also by Werkspoor, because Bijnes was taken over by Werkspoor actually. And altogether 160 units of these were built. At first, they were only in 2 parts, so with 1 articulation. But soon enough, they figured out if we put an extra section in the middle, we have even more capacity, and the engines can manage that, no problem. So they ordered an extra section and they put it in the middle of one of the existing trams to test it, and it worked fine. So from the 3rd generation, all were ordered in 3 sections, and they ordered extra sections for the ones they already had. So then they could have the maximum capacity in all the trams. These trams have run a long, long time. The first were delivered in 57, the last ones somewhere in the 60s, and they lasted until 2004. And that's why they've gone through 3 liveries. The first were gray, then they were yellow, and the last ones were white, the current livery of the GVB. Because these trams were so good, when they were being discarded, they were still popular abroad, and Poznan in Poland, they wanted 11 of them, so because they needed something to tie them over to a new tram delivery. So they bought 11 for 1 or 2 years, but in the end, it turned out they had used them for 8 or even 10 years before they got rid of them. That's how good they were. After the 7G came the 8G, that is this tram, 1974. 55 units were built, and it was the first tram in Amsterdam with air brakes and also air-operated doors. But this air system, it just didn't work, and this tram broke down so often, everyone hated it, simply because of all the technology that somehow didn't work, at least not here, because of course it was used in other countries, but for us it didn't work. After 8G came 9G and 10G, which basically meant it was 2 batches, in total only 37 units of this tram. We also call it the blokkendoos, the block box, although it had more or less the same technology as the 8G, it was less sensitive, it was much more reliable. They were all delivered in the yellow livery, but because they lasted until 2016, they were also painted white. Then in 1990, 1991, they ordered a new series, two batches basically, of this tram from La Brugeoise in Belgium. And this tram was built in the same way as the GTL tram was built in The Hague, and it came from the same factory. They don't look completely the same, but they are basically the same tram. One of the 2 batches is a unidirectional tram, and the other one is bidirectional tram. And they went out of service 2 years ago. And they are also the latest addition to our collection, because when they went out of service, we asked, could we have 2, please? And of course we could, because no one wanted them. Normally old trams, like the ones that went to Poznan, they could still run somewhere else. And these trams were in perfect order, but no one wanted them. All the countries that would usually take old trams from West European countries nowadays can get European subsidies. So they buy their own brand new trams, and these had to be scrapped, except for the ones that we took over. They were delivered in a light gray livery, but later they were all painted like this. This is the current GVB livery, white with blue. And after that came the articulated tram 13G and 14G, also known as the Combino tram from Siemens. And this has 5 sections. There's 155 units, of which 4 are bidirectional and 151 are unidirectional. These trams can also be used as a set, so 2 are connected. That's only used on the lines that are outside of the city center, because in the city center it's too big. And in the beginning, they were causing quite some trouble. They had tears in the trucks, etc., but it was all fixed by Siemens, and now they run reliably. And the latest addition to the GVB fleet is these CAF Urbus 100. And they are all ordered bidirectionally, 72 of them, and they had a option for another 51, but they have decided not to use the option and already to start working on a 16G model. So this is the number that we're keeping. Also, these can be used in sets of 2, and some run in this white livery, and some run in a gray livery that belongs to something called RNet. And throughout the Randstad, as I said earlier, the C-shaped area of all the big cities in the west of the country, there's this thing called RNet, and these trams are part of it as well. A thing here in Amsterdam is that in the old days, they started this color system for the tram lines, and this also exists in some other countries or other cities. And it looks a bit old-fashioned, but from day 1 up until today, they are still using it. So also if the displays are digital, they still have these colors. And actually, I took the bottom picture today. So this is how it ran just a few hours ago. By the way, for all the Italians, RAI in Holland has nothing to do with TV show or TV program. Rij is the Dutch word for the, or it's an abbreviation actually for rijwiel and automobielindustrie, or the industry for cars and bicycles. And this association is there first to promote cars and bicycles, but later they built a big exhibition center, and that is still called the Rij. So all car shows and other kinds of exhibitions are in the Rij area. There's a question from Ludwig. Will the bidirectional orders of the recent past mean that Amsterdam will replace the loops in the network? Maybe there are already loops replaced or given up. Actually, it's a good question, because at first they thought we're going to stop all the loops, we're going to take them away, because with the bidirectional trams, if we move to a complete fleet of bidirectional trams, we don't need them anymore. The loops are a problem because the trams going through there squeak a lot, and the people who live nearby, they don't like that. So yeah, that was the idea. But recently I've also heard the thought that maybe the next order, the 16G, may not be bidirectional, but will maybe unidirectional again. So I think they haven't made up their mind yet. Good. Then some more fun stuff of the Amsterdam trams. First of all, these two trams, you see a red post box in the back. All the tram lines that ran or run to Central Station used to have a post box on the back. So if you had a letter, you could put it in. Once the tram arrives at Central Station, there would be someone from the post company, empty the box and take the post directly into the distribution center. And maybe already that afternoon, in the second post delivery of the day, it might already be there where it should be. This ended in 1972, if I'm not mistaken, but it was a good thing. And yeah, we still keep them on the trams, of course, because the people recognize them and they like it. Another fun thing is the cargo, the city cargo tram. In 2007, they had thought of a concept where trams would be filled with cargo, parcels, etc., somewhere in the outskirts of the city. Then they would go into the city center, like to a place like this, and there they would unload up to this small electric vehicle, and then they would deliver the package to the address where it should be. And this to keep more trucks out of the city. The concept was very well received. It even won awards. And I was told that Richard Branson actually said, "Oh, I want to invest in this because this is the future." But after 4 weeks of trial, they stopped it and it didn't work. And we never heard of city cargo again. Then this narrow street, this is in the city center, and there used to run a tram line through it, just like this. I know, like in Portugal, you may find some streets like this, but I don't think there's a lot of places in the world where they do it like that. And the funny thing of this tram line through this street is that at the end of the street, so behind the photographer, it has to make a very direct curve to the left, because opposite the street is the river Amstel. So if you don't make the curve, you land in the water. And this tram just comes out of the street from the right, and it misses the curve, but it stops just in time. It doesn't go into the water, but it could have. And having said that, obviously, a city with a lot of canals and trams, how big is the chance that one will actually get into the water? Well, big. So this has happened a couple of times. And not just in Amsterdam, also in the other cities in the Netherlands where they have trams and canals, this has happened. So it's a funny picture. Then another fun stuff in Amsterdam trams is the engineering solutions that they sometimes have. Here they are building the first subway line in the 1970s, which is sort of going diagonally through the picture from left top to right bottom. And the tram line originally follows the red dotted line, but it can't. So they made this sort of S-curve around it, and then further to the right, it will move back to the street where it originally should have gone. And they just built this for like a couple of months, and then it can run its normal track again. And they've done it, this kind of solutions in more than just this location. It's a bit funny. Another nice thing is this. This is actually the train station at the Rai Exhibition Center in the 1980s. And then the train and the tram were still on the same platform. Of course, it's not the case anymore nowadays, but how convenient you want it. It doesn't get better than this. Then I want to show you some numbers from the GVB company. At the moment, they have 227 trams and they run on 15 separate lines. And those lines altogether run on a network that is 215 kilometers long. They have 90 metro trains that are used on 4 lines, and they have 81 kilometers of rails. So quite some kilometers for just 4 lines, I would say. In total, they have 222 buses. They run on 33 lines, and at night, after midnight, there's still 11 lines running. So 11 bus lines run all through the night. The trams and the metros stop at 1 o'clock, but the buses go through the night, at least 11 lines. And they have 24 ferry boats, 7 lines, 7 connections from one to the other side of the water. And 2 of those also run 24 hours a day. So you're never stuck. We go back to the map of the metro and the tram lines. And I wanted to show you where are the depots and the workshops. The 3 yellow stars is where they have depots. And the one, the most to the right and to the top, that yellow one is not a actual building, but it's an area where they have a couple of rails and where they stop the trams at night. The other 2, they are actually depots, so the trams go inside and they are stored dry. Then the red asterisk is a depot that also has a workshop, so the trams are repaired and maintained there, as well as that they are stored there. And the blue one is the central workshop, and that is where all the metros and all the big jobs for trams are done. The blue one is a new building that was opened somewhere like 20 years ago, and first it was somewhere in the city center, but then of course for the metros they didn't have a place because the city, the metro is underground in the city, so that wouldn't work. So they built it outside there, outside of the city center. The red one actually, that depot actually is next door to our museum, so we are in that area of the city. Then some buildings. First, I'm going to answer this question. Let me see. Oh, that was just thanks. This building was built in 1923 in Amsterdam school style. And this was built, purposely built as the headquarters for the GVB company. And it's a beautiful building. It's on the edge of the city center. GVB is not in it anymore. They moved out in 1990. I guess it got too small or maybe too expensive. That could also be there now in some modern building somewhere in the outskirts. But this is a really beautiful example of the architecture style that was popular in Amsterdam between 1915 and 1930. It's sort of an Art Deco type of style, but very restrained. This building is a little older, and this used to be a a horse tram depot, but it's just such a nice picture with the horses in front. It was still used when they electrified the tram network, but obviously the electric trams don't fit in there because the doors are not high enough for the trams with their collectors. So only the trailer cars went in there, but they had a lot of those smaller depots and they stopped using them quite soon because it doesn't make sense to have your trailer car in one location and your remote engine car in another location. So they stopped it. After that, this building became a police station, and right now it is a gymnasium and a gym, yes, and everything is built around it. Then this is an overview of the Havenstraat depot, and that's the one that is next door to us. So this one has a parking spot for the trams, but it also has a workshop. So part of the trams are in the building, and that is also where the workshops is, but part of the trams are outside of the building. And at night, that parking area is completely full. And on let's say, the south, no, I shouldn't say it like that. On the bottom side of those buildings, you see a number of sheds, and that is the area where we are. And I will show you something more about that later. This is the other depot that is in the city. And this was also built in 1923 in the same era as the headquarters building. And this is also built in the same Amsterdam school style. It's also a beautiful building. It is a monument. It cannot be changed at all. They are still using it as a depot, but it's not very efficient, of course, because it's 100 years old and certain things have changed. For example, there are tracks there that are so close to the wall that a modern tram doesn't fit there. It's too wide. So thank God to that, we are allowed to park some of our trams in that depot because the modern trams don't fit. The other thing is it's right in the middle of all these housing. I don't think they would ever build it like that now, but in those days they did. This is the, you see this curved exit there, and this is in front of the curved exit. This was back then, and today we make this same picture with our trams. Nothing has changed, just the colors, but for the rest, it's all the same. Good. Something about our organization, Elektrische Museum Tramlijn Amsterdam. We started 1975. We have about 150 members. We're all volunteers. No one gets paid. We have a collection of about 70 trams that are from Amsterdam, from The Hague, Rotterdam, Utrecht, Groningen, and we have a tram from Prague. We used to have more trams from other countries, but we have to shrink our collection, so we had to get rid of them in the past 2 or 3 years. I will come to the shrinking in a few moments. We offer city rides in April to October season, so this coming weekend is the last one, and we offer rides during all kinds of events. Then we have our own track, which is 7.5 kilometers from Haarlemmermeer station to the city of Amstelveen. That was the city that is south of Amsterdam. And this track was a part of the former Haarlemmermeer railways. That was a regional railway track. And between 1912 and 1971, that was operating. All the other rails are gone. Only this last 7.5 kilometers is still there, and we are using it. And we rent out our trams for all kinds of parties and whatever. And of course, from those rides that we offer, we make money, and that is the money that we use to run the whole business, because we don't get any subsidies or anything. We are all completely self-supporting. This is the Haarlemmermeer station. So that is the station that originally belonged to the Haarlemmermeer regional tramline railways. We only use the right part of it. The other part is it's a wedding location, so we often have weddings at the neighbors. Then here we're looking at our end of the of our location. In the left bottom corner, you see the station, and I put the circle around our half of the station that we are using. And then you have to imagine where you see all the sheds behind the station. There used to be a rail, a number of rail lines, because they would all end up at the station and those trains would be running there. Of course, that has gone. They put in those sheds there. And to the back, this yellow part, this is where our workshop is and where our depot is and storage, etc., etc. Now, the city wants to use the whole terrain between, just behind the station on the left, all the way to the back to build housing. So we need to go, and all those sheds and whatever is in there also need to go, and then they will build about 450 apartments. This whole process has taken at least 10 years already, and it's still not finished because, okay, we don't mind going away, but we also want to come back because we need this location. And we cannot move anywhere else because we need to be connected to our tracks that go to Amstelveen, as well as to the tracks that go into the city. And there's been all kinds of solutions. How would that work? Eventually, they have now come up with a plan to put a new depot in this red area. And in terms of square meters that we have in buildings, it will be 50% of that. And that is the reason why we had to shrink our collection. And yeah, we're going to make it work. That's what I can say now. But the plan is that we will be out of this location somewhere in the next year. They will start building. And then once they put up the new red building there, then we move back in. And where are we going to be in the meantime? That is still to be decided. And until we know that, we won't move. We stay there because you cannot just put a tram anywhere, obviously. This is the track that we have. So on the left part, on the top is Haarlemmermeer Station, and then it runs down, and it runs down on the right part up to Parklaan. And that is already in the city of Amstelveen. We can't get any further than Parklaan at the moment, because under Parklaan you see like a white area that is a highway, and the highway is being broadened. They put in extra lanes. So they took out the bridge over which we cross the highway, and we can't go any further. That is also a project that takes years. And also that is a bit of a problem, but okay, we'll make it do. This is inside our workshop. The blue tram is one that's getting maintenance. It's not getting a big overhaul or anything. It's just getting maintenance. The yellow one behind it is the tram from Groningen. And yeah, this is where our volunteers work every Tuesday night and Saturday all day. This is a storage area. This is outside of Amsterdam that we recently hired to put all the stuff that we can't get rid of, but that we cannot leave in the location where we are right now. So it's all brought there, and we share it with a bus foundation. So the trams and buses are mixed up. You see in the middle this little gray tram with a yellow band. That is one to file the rails. I don't know exactly how to say it in English, but when the rails are getting used a lot, they get a bit unstable, and you need to straighten them out again. And that is what this tram was used for. Behind it, on the other side of the fence, you see a darker gray tram, and that is an American snow plow. And in the 1910s or 1900s, Amsterdam bought 2 of those from America, and they were used when there was snow. We have both of them, but one of them is now being scrapped because we don't have room for all of them, and this one is staying. Rail grinder, Sylvie, thank you. So it's the rail grinder that is the yellow, the small tram with the yellow band. Thank you. Then some more fun stuff, and this is tram number 72. In an earlier presentation, I saw a lot of trams that were somewhere in the backyard or in the countryside, used as a shed or whatever. And I thought, oh, we also have these stories. And on the left, the black and white photo, you see a lady in front of what is her house. And that house was a tram, which was from Amsterdam, which was not being used anymore. It was on the scrapyard. She and her husband, they bought it, they put it on the yard of her parents, and they lived there. They had children, and on the right you see a photo of the interior with their daughter. You see the TV set, which is on the position where actually the driver used to be. The middle of the windows of the windscreen is blocked, so there's no window anymore, but there used to be all window. And this lady, they lived there. Then at some point, they read something in the newspaper about old trams, and they thought, oh, we also used to live in an old tram, because they had already moved out. And then we have to find out if someone is interested in a tram, because it's just rotting away. So they got into contact with us in some way. And we went there with a group of people to dig out the tram. This is 1986. Dig out the tram and take it back to our location. And this is what we had. Tram number 72. And then they start working on it and work and work and work. And this is tram 72 today. That's what people can do. It's amazing. And that is actually the end of the story. I want to thank everyone for listening. Grazie a tutti per l'attenzione. And I will take questions if you have.